Labor Exchange Co-operative. This is a chapter from the book My Dear Ak'i, Please Don't Be Upset, authored by Faisu Mukunana, English translation published in 2021. This book is available from itascabooks.com. In the old days, the Tsou people didn't have so-called currencies. Because most of the household items were made by ourselves, we exchanged with other families what we had for things we didn't have. This barter system depended on mutual trust. No one made money. There was no profit motive, and items were traded with faith in their quality. Ultimately, to obtain something, we had to work for it. No work, no wealth of desired goods. Because no currency was used, labor needs would be met by fellow villagers, especially when a project required much labor and needed to be done within a certain time period. These tasks included planting rice seedlings, harvesting rice crops, and building houses, etc. When assistance was needed, word was spread, and the villagers would come quickly to help. If the work date was in conflict with that of another family, then the two families would consult with each other and resolve the conflict so that the villagers' labor force could be concentrated on just one family's work need at a time. While the villagers' help was totally voluntary, the host family was expected to prepare lunch and dinner to reward them for their day's labor. At the dinner, wine was served, and candies or equivalents were available for the persons who didn't drink, or for kids who came with their parents. In addition to the types of work mentioned above, there was a lot of other, seemingly endless work required of a farmer's family. For example, between planting rice seedlings and the rice harvest, weeding was required 2 or 3 times, and at least 3 times for millet farming. Additionally, there were crops of yam, bean, corn, and bamboo, actual forests in this case, which might consist of makino, tortoiseshell, and sweet bamboo. Then there was bamboo shoot picking, to be taken care of according to seasons of the year, and the regular care of tong oil trees. Some jobs required that multiple workers labored together at the same time. Doing so not only could speed up work completion, but also reduced loneliness and the feeling of isolation when they worked alone at their farmland in the remote mountains. Carrying out these tasks was different than, say, the planting of rice seedlings, for which help on a large scale was required. Instead, a non-monetary system was created to exchange labor, the so-called labor exchange co-op. During the Japanese occupation, from 1895 to 1945, it was called the Mutual Society, which nowadays is known as the Mutual Support Association. The difference between the Labor Exchange Co-op and the Mutual Support Association was this. Labor was exchanged in the former, while in the latter, money was used to help those in financial need. Some 10 people worked at one time to help families on a given day. 10 was about the right number, because to add more could concentrate the local workforce too much on a single family at the expense of others who perhaps needed to carry out season-sensitive work, be it weeds that were growing higher than the crops, or crops that couldn't wait much longer for harvesting. It was necessary for the workers of this labor co-op system to have and carry their own hand tools and lunch boxes. Of course, if the hosts happened to have delicious foods or sweets on hand, some harvested fruits, or by chance had just slaughtered a pig, the farmers certainly wouldn't hide these treats. Rather, they would gladly share them with the workers. The labor exchange co-op system was better organized among the immediate neighbors, enabling them to easily notify each other if there were changes of work location or if the host family had to cancel the work schedule due to unexpected circumstances. In those days, when there were no modern electronic devices, there were two ways to communicate with each other. The first entailed walking to a neighbor to speak in person with someone who might be 1 or 2 kilometers away. The second employed the call out loud method, a time and energy-saving communication alternative. This approach was used for things ranging from personal messages to governmental notices. The latter would include community meetings, military training notices, vaccine notices, registered mail or express mail ready for pickup by so-and-so at the postal office, etc. A person who wanted to call out loud to someone would first find an optimal spot facing the intended recipient's house so that the recipient of the message could hear the best. Once it was noticed that someone was calling from afar, he or she would in turn find a good spot, such as on the top or the ridge of a nearby mountain, to listen. This calling out across a valley was not an easy task. The person calling not only had to be able to project his voice far and loud, but ensure that the recipient could understand what he was saying. The recipient needed to have good hearing. Otherwise, he might mishear the message and pass on faulty information that could result in serious problems. Fortunately, unlike today, people in the past were not overloaded with information that deadened their sensory organs. This meant that their hearing and cognitive abilities were well preserved, and messages were rarely misheard. As to the labor exchange need, it all depended on what was to be done. If the work involved something light, like weeding, then women workers could manage it. If it were something heavy, building terraced fields or cultivating sloped land for crops, male workers would be required. I should note that female workers would not be rejected by male workers just because they were physically weaker. A good example would be if families couldn't provide male workers due to sickness or the deaths of male members. Their family hardship would be understood, and female workers would be accepted. Occasionally, 5 or 6 unmarried young ladies of the neighboring families would form a labor exchange group, although it was different from the regular groups. When we joined the regular groups that had male members or married members, we, the unmarried young ladies, refrained from laughing openly when we heard sex jokes. We just pretended that we didn't understand them. But it was totally different when the group members consisted of only unmarried young ladies. In the remote mountains, where we were alone, we didn't have to behave ladylike. Instead, we laughed out loud and fearlessly announced our personal secrets. Nothing was off limit. Even though the work was hard, we were happy girls. Members of our young lady group wouldn't do physically demanding work, such as building terraced fields or clearing land for farming. Rather, when we were freed up from work related to rice field and non-irrigated farmland, we collected firewood or pestled rice so that when it was time to cook, we didn't have to perform either of these tasks. The crisp sounds from pestle striking mortar gave us a feeling of abundance. We knew there would be no shortage of food. Although pestling rice required physical energy, we felt so happy and relaxed that we often sang songs or had small talks while we worked. After pestling, we would pick and remove the grains whose bran wasn't totally polished. Sometimes, while we pestled rice, we baked yams as snacks. All of these activities were very enjoyable things to do. I admired the patience and effort of a member of our group named Tsou for the way she took care of her skin. Most of us would just wear a hat made of bamboo leaves to protect us from the strong sunlight. Tsou, however, would put a flower-patterned square kerchief under the hat and wear gloves and protective sleeves. Her legs were also covered with leg wrappings called kyohong that were used by Japanese workers. Not only that, she would place newly grown and tender banana leaves between her skin and the hat, gloves, sleeves, and leg wrappings. As for me, in the hot sunshine, I would just wear a short-sleeved shirt and skirt, and my exposed skin would often be sunburned. Zhuang's multi-layer protected face, hands, and legs had never been exposed to sunlight, and were so fair that they were envied by all of us. On the other hand, looking at myself, I was the one to be blamed because I was too lazy to protect my skin. However, I never paid much attention and adopted the attitude, whatever will be, will be. Still, seeing someone else's fair skin, oh yes, I envied it. There was no doubt about it. However, I had no desire to learn from her how to become more diligent about making myself up. No wonder my mother often nagged at me, saying that some of my age group friends were already married and had kids, while no one even courted me. A classmate of mine got married at the age of 16 and became a grandma before she turned 40. At the time of this writing in 2003, she was about 60 and a great-grandmother. I think it all has to do with a person's interests and destiny, which cannot be controlled. Not long ago, this former classmate, who was such a beauty when she was young, came for a visit. She spoke of the then young lady co-ops, and we all laughed uncontrollably as we recounted some of the funny things that had happened back then. Inevitably, what came up was the subject of her envy-producing fair skin. I asked her whether she still used banana tender leaves to cover up her skin when she worked. She laughed loudly and lamented, "What banana leaves? I'd forgotten all about it until you mentioned it. After I got married, I had borne 7 kids non-stop, in addition to endless work on the farm. See, I have lost almost all of my teeth. How could I care for the skin?" What she said was true. Other than her skin, which was whiter than mine, just as it had been before, she did look like a woman close to 60 years of age, one who had been working under the hot sun for a long time. The passage of many years had had no mercy on her. It candidly marked every bit of life and its many hardships upon her once youthful face.